Hello, and welcome to EY Law IP webcast on brand protection and IP infringement in digital world. My name is Justyna Wilczyńska-Baraniak, and I'm Intellectual Property Technology and Data Protection Leader at EY Law Poland. It's my great pleasure to welcome my distinguished guest, Brett Miller, Senior Director, Global Brand Protection at Fitbit, US company producer of activity trackers. Brett is based in San Francisco and deals with global brand protection cases related to IP enforcement, customs protection, forensic, and supply chain. Hello, Brett.
Good morning, Justina. Good to be with you today.
Great. It's really nice to have you here today. We will have 30 minutes and we will try to cover all important issues related to brand protection and what is important for organizations in this digital era. We will also go and think about the strategy, what next, what the strategy is for the companies today. And please stay till the end of the session because I will tell you a bit about EY deep dive session on brand protection, and I will tell you how to register for such free of charge session. So, Brett, let's go to the topic we have here. So can you tell just about the general issues of brand protection? Why in general it is important to protect the brand?
Well, a company's brand is part of its reputation, and it's also a critical component of its corporate valuation. It's the name, it's the mark, it's the image that consumers associate with that brand. So if the brand is damaged in any way or diminished by the sales of counterfeit products or other illicit products in the market, as well as other challenges that may damage the brand in the name of and in the eyes of the consumer, that can affect the corporate valuation and the overall profitability of the brand.
Well, I know that many US companies have established brand protection teams. So what stands behind such approach?
Normally, when companies make the investment to actually have a formal brand protection team, it's usually reactive in nature after some type of issue, significant issue has been found. Normally, it relates to counterfeit products on the market, which are competing against the brand as well as causing consumer confusion. That's how most of them are established, is once those problems. Also, in some cases, it may be because of serious gray market issues and they need someone to come in and take a look at their overall sales and distribution and supply chain channels to make sure that the products that they're developing for sale in certain markets are staying in those markets and are not being diverted into other markets where they should not be sold.
Yeah, great. So I understand that actually it's not anymore only to protect the value of the brand, to protect the value of the company, but it's also to protect the customers. But let's not move toward the issue we should discuss today, protecting the brand in the digital world. It comes from my experience that the bigger the footprint of the company into the digital world, the bigger the risk is. So how the companies should be prepared for today's challenges in the digital world? What are these challenges for the brands?
Well, there's numerous challenges when dealing in e-commerce sites and sales, particularly when they're not direct from the company or brand. And further complicating those issues is the myriad of different e-commerce sites out there. There is no standardization in terms of reporting of infringing or other illicit products on there. So it's very much contingent upon the company to understand the process and procedures of filing complaints on e-commerce sites and how to take appropriate action, as well as determining what process is necessary, whether it's within the sales representatives of those companies or risk management or brand protection teams within those companies, or their legal department to have to escalate claims that are rejected upon initial submission.
So in terms of IP customs protection, do you think that this protection can help to prevent entry of counterfeited products to the EU market? I have read that about quarter of the product bought by customers online happened to be counterfeited. So what is the best approach to prevent this? Is the EU customs protection helpful?
Absolutely. In fact, it's integral because the prevention of importation of counterfeit and other illicit products is your first line of defense to protect the consumer from potentially buying those products. So in order for that to actually work, you have to implement a multifaceted program which has various aspects to it to make the customs enforcement program effective.
Yeah, there are actually, when I look at the practical side of this EU customs protection, so there are millions of products which are actually coming to the EU. So how we can explain to customs, how we can provide customs information about product of particular brand, how this can be effective, how can they know when to stop the product, which product is counterfeited. So what's your advice on that?
Well, the first step in the process is you having your trademark registered within a region or country is in and of itself is not enough. You actually have to make recordals with the individual customs agencies of those trademarks. And that will, once they accept those recorders, that will start the process for potential customs protection. But it's much more than that. You also should put together a comprehensive customs training manual that outlines and educates customs officials in terms of what your brand is. Also show them side-by-side pictures with illustrations in terms of how to identify and differentiate a counterfeit product from a legitimate product. And you also within that manual, you want to outline your legitimate sales channels and distribution channels within that market. So it gives them some indicia of whether or not a product may be imported into the country, which is not authorized in the first place. And then the third step, which is also critical, where I find a lot of brands often don't follow up with, is training, education, and awareness. So it's not enough to do these first two steps. You actually need to get out and meet with these customs officials, particularly in the key ports of entries in various countries and regions, to educate them about your brand. And the more they recognize your brand or familiar with the brand, the higher the potential of them initiating a detention of a product and an ultimate seizure of a counterfeit devices coming into that country. And then the final step is response. If you are notified by customs officials relative to a seizure, it's contingent upon you to respond in a timely manner and in a thorough manner. So often what will happen is they'll detain products, they'll provide certain information to that brand and say, we have this, we suspect it may be counterfeit. They will often provide pictures. You may have to ask for additional digital images to do the analysis. But what's most important is that you provide an accurate and an opinion that can be supported legally, should that seizure be contested. And likewise, you may ultimately choose to take separate legal action against the importer or exporter. So it's absolutely important that those responses are absolutely true and correct.
Yeah, so I understand that it is really important to meet with the customs. So have you traveled to around the world to meet with the customs? How do you manage it? You're responsible for the whole world, actually. So in terms of, for example, EU, is it better to have a single point of contact or rather to have the local contact in each jurisdiction? So what's the best approach to really manage such a huge area of prevent these areas from entering counterfeited products?
Yeah, it's critical that you have a single point of contact, and particularly for companies that may not have brand protection personnel in every region, in every country. That can easily be delegated to your local law firm, which is retained there, which then can be the single point of contacts for filtering in those inquiries that come from customs. And then, of course, that firm would follow up with you for the further forensic and legal analysis of those infringing products. So it is important, if you don't have somebody in the region, to have a single point of contact, not only to respond in a timely manner to these inquiries, but to also provide and localize and translate the relevant response to customs officials.
Usually I got questions from customs whether the clients want to also size one item of counterfeited product.
Right.
So what's your approach? Why this is helpful to size even this one piece of item?
Justina, that's an excellent question. So the counterfeiters, like most criminals, adapt. They adapt very well to how to get their products into certain markets. Traditionally, counterfeit products were imported into countries en masse, either via sea freight or air freight via containers, which made it much easier for customs officials to detect those counterfeit products being imported as well as seizing them. And likewise, it caused much more economic harm to the counterfeiters and greater losses. What they've done is they've modified their strategy, where now they will do smaller shipments into a country, or in even some instances, single shipments directly to a consumer. And certainly with the rise of e-commerce websites, it has facilitated that activity. For example, if you're on a particular website and you think you're buying a particular product, which is being advertised by a third-party seller, but it appears to be the brand you're looking for and at a better price. So you purchase that device thinking that it's coming directly from the brand owner, when in reality, that product may be coming from a counterfeiter overseas or through one of its local agents who's simply a distributor in that country. So it's critical from that standpoint, as well as once the actual seizure has occurred, in most instances, global customs officers will provide you with the importer and exporter information. Both are critical intelligence to help you work back to determine the distribution and production channels of those counterfeit products and where they emanate from. Likewise, in terms of the importer, you may choose as a brand to take legal action against them, whether or not it's a separate cease and desist letter, as well as you want to work with that e-commerce site to take down that seller so they're prevented from selling counterfeit or infringing products on that e-commerce site in the future.
Brett, thank you for this answer. And you touched the issue of e-commerce platforms. And I think right now in the digital era, it is really crucial for the brands to be present there. But on one side, you can reach your customer very quickly through e-commerce. And on the other side, there are so many unauthorized suppliers that, as you mentioned, sell the products with a lower price and not really original products. So how brands can maintain integrity and safety for customers selling on e-commerce platforms?
All good questions as well. So again, there is no standard practice in the myriad of e-commerce sites around the globe in terms of how to submit claims of potential infringing or other unauthorized products that are not allowed in that country. But what is critical, you have to monitor. So what I've found is using a combination of both outside market monitoring vendors in conjunction with test purchases done in-house to identify potential infringing sites. In most instances, many of the takedowns will be conducted based on misuse of proprietary images. Traditionally, simply someone copying an image, e-commerce site would accept that and take down the site. But we're finding increasingly you have to actually copyright those marketing images to inhibit third-party sellers from using them on these e-commerce sites. So I would certainly recommend, in addition to your trademark protections that you already have, to copyright your marketing images as well. In terms of the outside market monitoring, there's a number of different companies out that do it and do it quite well. But for each particular brand, you have to kind of explore what's going to work best for you. For example, you may not have a problem in every single market in the world. So a certain market monitoring service that might be less costly might work for you if you're only interested in certain regions or countries, right? But in addition to that, simply hiring a market monitoring service for your enforcement is not enough. You too have to be involved, regularly making test purchases, regularly making analysis of those products to determine their origin and whether or not they're contraband, not just counterfeit, but potentially products stolen from your supply chain through the distribution channels or even obtained through fraud. So my recommendation is always a combination of outside vendor, market monitoring combined with in-house test purchases, and then actively enforcing on those e-commerce sites when appropriate.
Yeah. What comes to my mind right now when I hear your response is that many e-commerce sites have dedicated brand protection program. Okay. Nice, I like it.
Hold on for 1 second.
I know, yeah. No, that's no problem. Yeah. This was nice. I think this was real. It could stay, you know?
Yeah.
Really?
He certainly likes me.
Yeah. Okay, so we have to start the question.
Sorry about that.
No problem. With reference to e-commerce sites, I know that many of them have dedicated programs to brand protection. Is it really helpful to join such program and enforce IP rights through this program? Does it work the same on each e-commerce platform? What is your experience, Brad?
Yeah, so we participate in most of the brand protection enforcement programs on all the major e-commerce sites. And as what's happening more and more is in order for you actually to implement a takedown request or some type of action by that e-commerce site, you're going to have to join one of their programs to really be effective. As I had stated previously, the problem is there is no standardization between e-commerce sites on how to do it. Each one has a different program, and even within e-commerce sites in different countries, they may have a different process and procedure for raising claims or escalating claims of infringing products. So another complexity to this issue is you really have to have someone who's dedicated to understanding how these submission programs work on the different e-commerce sites and to submit them accurately and know how to escalate if they are rejected.
Yeah, Brett, your background has been in protecting brand, detecting fraud. So what is your recommendation for legal counsels, board members who are listening to this webcast? How they should protect the brand if they are not really doing that right now in the digital era? I know from my experience that protecting the brand, it's not only the issue for the companies that just starting to be on the market, but it's still the issue for the huge global organizations that keep trying and keep enforcing their IP rights in the digital world. So what's your advice to our guests who are listening us today?
Well, the first step is, of course, making sure that your IP is protected on the front end. So that's a combination of trademark, registrations. As I indicated on marketing images, I highly recommend copyright protection, as well as that's increasingly becoming a requirement for e-commerce sites to enforce against third-party unauthorized resellers who are using your proprietary images to facilitate illicit sales of your products, as well as patent and community design protection as well. Those are all components that should be done on the front end. And you should make sure that as much as possible within the early design of a product, you're taking into account protecting that product against potential infringement, right? So where are we going to put the trademarks? Is it going to be on packaging? Is it going to be on the device? How do we do that? What do we need to make that's unique that we can protect against a certain counterfeit problem? Then subsequent to that, you have to assess what your problem is. So it's very difficult sometimes for a company to quantify the damage that is being done when a particular problem is identified. In the case of fraud, it may be a one-off incident that needs to be thoroughly investigated and prosecuted either through civil or criminal channels, right? Or other mechanisms, right? Through audits and contract breach discussions. But in other instances, particularly where you have counterfeit, it's hard to gauge exactly how big that problem is. My recommendation is that you find someone from the outside to actually do an assessment to take a look at what your potential problems are, what the economic loss is, and give some advice on how to proceed forward. And there are a number of different people out there and law firms and consultancies that have expertise in this area that you should leverage to determine exactly what your problem is and how much it's costing the company. And maybe come up with some early recommendations on what you can do to affect that problem. That I think is the most important thing. So front-end protection of your intellectual property, then assessing what exactly is that problem with the company, and then customizing a solution based on that assessment.
Yeah, you raised actually a very important issue, the strategic one for someone who is thinking where to put the actually trademark, whether on the device or on the packaging. So it, of course, reflects the enforcement effectiveness, because if you place the trademark on the packaging and not on the device itself, then you lack of effective protection and enforcement. So that was a great point. So thank you, Brett, for that. And I think we are coming to the end. So last question, which I think is very important in terms of e-commerce platforms. Do you think there is a space for e-commerce platforms to do more in terms of protecting the brands? Or you think it works perfectly, or there is still some space for improvement?
Yeah, there's certainly room for improvement on most e-commerce sites. But I will say that many in most recent years have made a definitive effort to try to set up mechanisms to make it easier for brands to enforce. And in many cases, they do so fairly effectively. However, it's a constantly evolving process. Some e-commerce sites do it better than others. Sometimes you may submit takedown requests and they will want someone locally, a law firm locally, to actually submit those requests formally to them. And as I had said previously, there is no standard process across all these myriad of different e-commerce sites to effectively take down infringing products or illicit products. So you really have to become educated and aware of what the process and mechanisms are within those sites. And I would recommend that you have someone dedicated to cataloging and submitting those requests and keeping a record of it, including those that are rejected, right? Even though they should be accepted, and how many times you had to resubmit them. And if necessary, you may have to escalate that both with a combination of your sales team who has that relationship, as well as through your internal and external legal challenges to affect changes so the process works more effectively for your brand.
Thank you, Brett. I'm afraid that's all we have for today. As I promised at the beginning, I have invitation for you to register for free of charge EY deep dive session with our IP experts. During such session, We will go through your brand protection strategy or issues you have with your brand, with your products, and give you some initial recommendation how to move forward with effective brand protection in digital era. Hope you enjoyed today's meeting, and I look forward hosting you next time. Stay tuned. Goodbye.